Hello everyone, welcome back aboard the night train for part 3 of modelling this river in the corner of my layout. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, comment and all the usual YouTube jazz. With the scenery of the riverbed down and the fence installed, it was time to do those all-important finishing touches such as adding little figures in there, doing all the foliage, and I even tried my hand at making my own homemade willow trees. I couldn't find any willow trees that I felt looked quite realistic enough. All the leaves and that looked a little bit coarse on those that you can get off the shelves. So I thought, why not have a bash at making my own? Let's see how it all came together. Here's where we got to last time. The water surface sheet of perspex got its texture, the riverbed got some reeds, rocks and driftwood, and I installed this laser cut wire fence to stop my trains going for a swim. The coup de grace of my underwater plan was to install figures. Using a hand drill and some clear acrylic rod, I drilled a hole into the painted figure of this Loch Ness monster, chosen for its fun factor, and put the rod into its underside. Making a hole of the same size in the riverbed, I fitted Nessie into position, along with some sturgeon fish at various heights in the water column. As for the riverside foliage, I first laid some flower tufts around on either side of the fence and line. I installed the hedgerow at a previous point to give structure on both sides of the rails. To bulk out the shrubbery, I then glued down some lichen to really build up the vegetation growth around the fence, blending it into the landscape. I used watered down PVA glue to stick these down. In places, I let the lichen overhang the bank as shrubbery often does in real life. Now onto making the willow trees. For these I used some woodland scenic tree armatures sprayed in grey primer. First I cut off any flashing and the injection points that stuck out amongst the trunk texturing. I used a craft knife and file to work these down. Next, being made of soft, posable plastic, I bent the branches of the tree out into the shape and position I wanted. Once I was happy with the pose, I painted the trunk in a bluish grey undercoat. Atop this, I painted a thin layer of green to simulate lichen growth over the trunk. I also used a thin layer of brown to pick out the bulbous pathology on the tree tooling. With the trunk sorted, it was time to make the long flowing leaves. For this, I used a technique I found in a video by Sparky107107, linked in the description. I used single strand green embroidery thread stretched over a cardboard box. I soaked these strands in diluted PVA, making sure it soaked through the thread. Next, I sprinkled the finest green scatter I had over the threads, catching any excess in a tray below so I could reuse it later. After leaving the threads to dry overnight, I then cut off the ends and sections not covered in scatter. The threads were then cut into short, roughly equal sections. Once cut, I folded these sections in half and held them in position to ensure they held. After leaving the pegged thread sections overnight, it was time to add them to the tree. Using undiluted PVA, I brushed this onto branches and then stuck the thread sections onto them, draping the tips down either side of the branch. After leaving them to dry, I worked the leaves into shape and then moved along to glue threads onto other bare branches. I repeated this process until all the branches were covered and I couldn't increase the density on the tree any further. With the tree ready for planting, I drilled a hole into the riverbank, covered the base with PVA and popped the tree in position. I squirted a little bit of diluted PVA around the edge once that was in place, just to ensure it stuck. By comparison to the top of the bank, The side of the bank itself looked bare, so I used a hand drill and some spare seafoam segments to model roots protruding from the soil above the water. I put these in along the bank below where there was vegetation, angling them towards the water. I bent them downwards and towards the bank so they didn't stick out unnaturally. To spruce up the variety of vegetation on the banks, I added some of the same laser cut plants I used along the embankment on the edge of the board. And here is the final result. It's not perfect, but it really sets the scene I was going for. There's real layers in the three-dimensionality of the modelling, from the riverbed to the water's surface, to the bank and the railway running past. The willow trees blend nicely with the other vegetation, all of which helps blend that wire fence into the landscape. With a few trains running, there's multiple angles to enjoy. There we are, that's both back corners of the layout now modelled. I'm sure I'll make tiny tweaks and adjustments to them here and there, but on the whole, I'm really happy with how they've turned out. My next big job is the narrow gauge line going across the two backboards. I've got the yard to model, I've got platforms to build, I've got to model all of the landscape so I can put a tunnel in on one side of the layout. So lots more really big projects for me to really dig my teeth into. With autumn and winter moving in, it really is the season to get modelling again, so I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of great progress over the months ahead. Famous last words. Anyhow, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in another video very shortly. Take care.